Quick note. Originally, Adnan was going to be here as well. Sadly, he couldn't be here. And Gus flew halfway around the world to be here on short notice. So a little bit of a round of applause for that. Maybe you've been up like 48 hours or so.
It's Wednesday, I think.
Plus beers, that helped too. Yeah, cool. So thanks everyone for being here. We're going to talk about Kube Apps, about what OSB, Open Service Broker, is. We're going to talk about how Service Catalog fits into this as well. So I'll use my best movie preview voice. In the beginning, we had this thing called Service Catalog, and we also had this OSB, the Open Service Broker. That was kind of on one side of the house here. And then there was this monocular thing. Who's familiar with monocular? Yeah, Bitnami project. It's cool. It's really cool. Go look it up if you haven't heard of it. And they sat separately. And some folks at Bitnami and some folks at Microsoft got together and tried to figure out how can we make these things work together. That was rad, as you can see. And it just happened pretty recently. So this talk is kind of about the fruits of that labor. So just basically, the result is that we went from this. Can everybody see this? It's a CLI. Yeah, so we went from this. This is kind of like the operator interface to Service Catalog. It's showing that you can, in Kubernetes, get access to a lot of managed services in the cloud. Right? So we have a bunch of Azure services that you guys should all provision a lot of so that I get paid. And you can go and connect to them pretty seamlessly inside of your Kubernetes app. So that was great. We had this little CLI experience that looked nice. But sort of from this collaboration, we got to this. So this is Kube Apps. This is sort of the UI way, the nice sort of catalog way. You can go into a website. You can provision your own Helm chart. You can provision a bunch of cloud services, and you connect your app together with those new provisioned cloud services, all inside of a web interface, and that's kind of cool, right? So real quick, let's talk about what the actual Service Catalog does, okay? So you've got Homer here. He's saying, well, what do I do in the cloud if I'm running my app? It's super simple now to get access to compute. It's super simple to get access to network, super simple to get access to a file system. But what if you want to run your database in the cloud? Okay, that's doable totally. You can go upstream to the stable repo, you can Helm install MySQL, and you're good to go. But then you go on for a week or 2 weeks, you get a lot of traffic, your Reddit, let's say, and eventually, your database fills up or it goes down for whatever reason, then you got to start hiring people to deal with that and sort of running MySQL in a container. There are other issues that can come up as well. So that's all good, but if you're a small team, for example, it'd be really cool to use the cloud. Who's heard of the cloud? Wow, you guys should check it out. It's pretty cool. Yeah. Who's heard of serverless then? I heard that was cool. So yeah, in the cloud, all three of the big clouds, they all have managed services. Managed MySQL, managed Postgres, managed whatever, right? So instead of hiring a team to manage your MySQL in the cluster, you can go to the cloud and get the cloud to manage it for you for a nominal fee, right? So Homer is here is wondering, is there an easy way for me to hook up my Helm chart, my app, to one of these cloud databases? Why, yes, there is. So we're going to show how this actually works in a demo that is not going to fail because we have it recorded, not subject to the Wi-Fi. But before we go into that, I'm just going to go over the pieces of this puzzle, right? So we've got this thing called an Open Service Broker, OSB. Actually, this says Open Service Broker Broker. It's pretty rad. It's two brokers, not just one. So this is the API, the standard API that sits in front of all of the proprietary cloud APIs, right? Standardization is good at the API level because now we can get things that run everywhere to talk to all the clouds if they need to. And Service Catalog is one of those things. So this is a system that runs inside of Kubernetes that translates Kubernetes resources into calls to an OSB broker. And the OSB broker then can do stuff to your cloud. Whichever cloud you choose, it can give you databases and queues and caches and everything. All right, so now we go on to class, provision, and bind. Class is essentially a catalog entry, right? So you flip through your IKEA catalog and you say, oh, I want a database, MySQL database. It's probably called like Holmvik, something like that. I don't know Swedish for database, but you can do that. You can get a cache, whatever, right? Provision means the action of giving me a database, all right? And then bind means the action of giving me the credentials for that database so I can actually use it, right? So I'm going to throw it over to Gus now. He's the handsome one, and he's going to go over what kubeapps does and how it fits into this whole system.
Thanks. Yeah, it's unusual that I've got more hair on stage. Right. I'll turn that off.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, 2 Australians in a row. You're going to have to explain what that white stuff is. That's not something we have where I come from. Anyway, so kubeapps. Kubeapps is all about trying to make it easier. There's a gap at the moment when you've installed your cluster and you've finished that install process. There's lots of help out there to help you install a cluster, and then you're left with this empty cluster. So there's this kind of gap, if you're a new user, between that empty cluster and actually being able to use it properly. And so kubeapps is something that is trying to help close that gap and trying to make it easier to discover what you can do with the cluster, just how you get started. Lets you defer some of that sort of learning to later on when you actually want to be more involved in how your application's running. So very quickly, there used to be kubeapps pre-KubeCon. kubeapps was a website where you could look at all the stable charts and you could comment on them and star them and link to them and things. That still exists, but we moved that to hub.kubeapps.com. So kubeapps has now evolved to something that runs in your cluster, and it's much more about an in-cluster dashboard kind of launchpad. So it's a combination of a bunch of different tools that we've been working on at Bitnami. The main ones, particularly in this context, are Helm and Monocular. It's obviously an evolution of the Monocular kind of code base, and it's all built around Helm charts. But there's other bits that get bundled in there as well. And as I was saying, the whole focus is on closing that gap when you have an empty cluster. So lots of discoverability, lots of browsing. So as a new user, if you don't know what you're doing, you can just say point here, and you can discover and go, oh, MariaDB, I know what that is. I know how to install it. And the other way around, if you're the cluster provider, you can slap this on there, and it's easy to help your users consume your resources. The big thing we've added, as just talked about, is service catalog integration. So we get to look at that in a few slides. So first of all, it's very easy to install. kubeapps up installs a bunch of stuff into your cluster. And then kubeapps dashboard, you type that, and it fires up your browser pointing to the dashboard. So then you can scroll down, choose, in this case, WordPress, and then you get something like that. That's basically the I've installed a chart screen. All right. As we all know, Kubernetes is really just a hardware abstraction layer for WordPress. So how do I get to the... Right, we did have a whole demo here, but given the Wi-Fi, we thought we'd go with the video version instead. So this isn't quite as good as me doing it in person, but we'll make do here. So there's us running kubeapps up, installing a whole lot of things. You wait a little while, those things run in your cluster, and then you run kubeapps dashboard, as I was saying, and then you get the browser pointing it there. So this is the kubeapps dashboard. Now this is us installing the catalog because we focused on the service catalog stuff. So we install the catalog. There's a core catalog component which is just a regular chart. So here we are installing a regular Helm release. Service catalog, there's the big values YAML blob, and here's it deploying. So you can see it's got an API server, controller manager components. Doesn't really matter what the details are, there it is deployed. Okay, now on top of that, we're going to install the Azure Open Service Broker. So this is, the first part was the generic component. This part is the part that knows about Azure services. So you have to put your Azure credentials in there in real life. So you would let it log into the Azure cluster as you and configure resources as you. And then that deploys. So we've now got the two components. So now we can go and look at the actual service catalog entries. So here's all the ones that Azure offers. If I could scroll down, but I can't in the video. So for the purpose of this demo, we're going to install the managed MySQL, the Azure MySQL DB down there. So we select a plan. So this is This is the catalog, the service classes was the previous screen. This one's the plans. So they're the two things you need to install a service under the service catalog. So we're going to choose the basic 100 tier, and again we give it a name, and then there's some parameters specific to the service provider. And there we go. We have just, if I can go back there, I don't know if I can. Anyway, we've just installed a MySQL instance on the Azure cloud. It's a good thing this is a video because that normally takes about 10 minutes to actually spin up. But then we create a binding. This is how we use that service. Create a binding, and this video flicks really quickly, and I used to be able to go backwards, but now the scrolly display thing's gone. Anyway, create a binding. The binding creates a secret, which includes the credentials you need to talk to that particular instance of MariaDB. So now to use that, this is going back to the main part of Kube Apps. We're going through to install the WordPress chart. This is normally what you see when you come to Kube Apps. Normally this is the experience. You're looking at the big list of Helm charts and you choose one to install. So we're going to install WordPress and we're going to deploy. So here we go. Now normally you would look at the values YAML there, and normally you would go down and create the passwords and things that you want. The normal chart, as you know, the WordPress chart has the MariaDB dependency kind of embedded within it. So you install the WordPress chart, you also get your own MySQL MariaDB. In this case, we don't want to use that. So we go down the values YAML there and we turn off the MariaDB dependency. And then on the right here, we can pull down the bindings that we had. So the binding we created a few screens ago for the Azure managed MySQL. So we choose that, and that shows us on the side there the contents of that secret. So this was the secret that was created from the binding that includes the details we need to be able to talk to that hosted MariaDB. So now I don't have this in the demo, but normally what we would do is scroll down on the values YAML on the left to find where we need to put in those passwords, and we copy and paste them across from the right-hand side there to the left-hand side. And then we would deploy, and off it would go. And so down there, those values in that section, you'd have to copy those across from there. So, and then it would deploy, and away it goes. And so there it is deploying, and here we are jumping over just to prove that it's using the Azure database. That's us looking at the logs for the WordPress pod. And then we get the endpoint, it's configured, and we can go to the endpoint, and we of course get the screen. Hooray! So this is now a WordPress blog running on my local cluster where the state is being stored in an Azure managed database. So all that happened, but me as a user didn't have to understand all that. All I had to do was browse entries and click entries, and it's all there. So very, very easy to get started, very easy to get on board, very easy to work out how to consume resources from the provider. And that is mostly the demo. Yeah. Hooray. So there we go. All right, I'll flip back to, where are we, that one? Nope. Preview, that one. Okay. All right, so yeah, so that's kind of the current status. This is very new. That was mostly added literally last week. And you can see it's a little bit rough still. You don't want to have to, at the moment you have to copy and paste across the password entries. That's necessary right now because the standard charts, the stable charts, don't include integration for service catalog bindings. In a glorious future, you would create the binding resources directly within the chart, and then it would know that this would create a secret, and in the rest of the chart you would consume that secret, and you would never have to ask the user to be aware of that whole process. That means updating all the charts to include that functionality, so that's obviously a longer term proposal. But there is that Azure Helm charts repo that has this already done to a bunch of charts, which is quite nice, and that shows what this could look like. Yeah, so we're also looking to add Kube Apps up. At the moment, it doesn't really know what cloud you're running on, but it'd be very easy for us to add support for different clouds, and then it would automatically install the right service broker. So right now it automatically installs Tiller and things like that. It'd be very easy for us to automatically install the Azure service broker or the Google service broker. And then all this would just work out of the box. And then we have a bunch of other things coming up with Cube Apps, improving the Kubeless UI. We haven't talked about that much, but there's a Kubeless component to Cube Apps as well, so you can do functions as a service. You can, again, big text box, type out your function, hit submit, and you've got it running in your cluster. And that's got some improvements coming up to it. And as another way, there's some of the conversations we need to have with chart developers as to how we want to do this. Perhaps a halfway ground would be to say, let's just take a pre-prepared secret. I'm going to give you a secret that's going to include the right details for MariaDB. And then the chart could just say, okay, I want to use that secret. And then through the bindings, we could just make that secret exist. So then we're not tying the charts to the idea of the service catalog directly, but we're using a secret as an intermediate point for those two. So there's various things we could talk about there and directions we could go. I'm very interested in working out what we want to do as far as charts development standards there go. We're up to. Do we have anything else there? And I think that's it. So there's been a lot of people involved in this, and most of them aren't me. Adnan, in particular, has done a lot of the work around that from the Bitnami side, and then some other people working on Cube Apps generally, and lots more folks. Yeah. So it's all a free software project on GitHub. Welcome to take it, use it, try it out. Send us pull requests or bug reports. Thank you very much. Oh, you want one more thing?
Yeah, so I also want to mention there are quite a few systems at play here. So there's obviously Kube Apps here. Service Catalog is upstream in the Kubernetes incubator. There are quite a few brokers out there, not just the open service broker for Azure. There's going to be a list that we're going to start up under a new GitHub org that has kind of most of the big brokers out there. So look out for that. I'm sure it'll pop up on Twitter and other places as well. So get involved. I encourage you to go check out any one of these pieces, file issues. You can always DM one of us on Twitter, mention us, bother us, and of course we'll be around for the rest of today and tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
We'll take up some questions.
If anyone's got any questions. We didn't really have an architecture slide there somewhere, but it might be interesting since this is a Helm group. Inside Cube Apps, what we're actually doing is we're using a CID controller to talk to Tiller. So Cube Apps, the web component, or the back end behind that is actually creating custom resource, a Helm release custom resource, which in turn triggers the install, delete, update of charts. So we've separated those two to add a bit more security. And in particular, where I come from, I'm really interested in declarative management and these sorts of tooling. So the service broker stuff is really interesting for me in that regard because it takes what used to be an imperative process, create an account, create the database, get the credentials. It takes all of that and turns it into a declarative statement. So I can say, I just want a database. And then I want to consume the credentials from that, and I can do that nicely as Helm resources. So I think the service broker stuff is really interesting, and I'm really excited to see where that goes in terms of integration with the rest of the Kubernetes resource tooling in the next couple of months. So thanks. Yeah, any questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, has there been any effort to plug in Helm as the backend to the broker so that you could request an Azure MySQL instance, or you could ask for Helm to install you a MySQL instance with the same front-end API?
Yeah, I'm glad I planted you in the audience to ask that. That's a super good question. So there actually is a Helm broker out of Google. You can literally go to github/google/helm-broker. So it presents that same OSB interface, and you can sort of preload it with a set of Helm charts that you would like it to provision. And then it has kind of a conventional way to return those secrets back to you. So you think about it as sort of a broker that you can customize based on the Helm charts you want to install. We've also got another broker that's going to come and go in that same sort of common OSB repo. It's going to be fairly the same thing, a little bit more dynamic though in terms of what charts you want.
It's a quick question. I'm assuming, is there a way to specify your own Helm repository so that it's not just the...
Yeah, there definitely is. It's too much effort for me to flick to it, but up the right-hand side, there's a little settings menu, and you can just add repositories. Just add the URL, give it a name, done. So the Azure Service Broker was installed from the Azure repository in that demo there. So you didn't see us actually add the repository, but that's what happened.
How would you specify all those like fancy icons and whatnot you had showing up there? Is that part of the Helm definition?
They're part of the Helm thing. They come from it.
You got any jokes?
Not as funny as the previous Australian ones. Yeah, I was going to say the answer to most of those was New Zealanders or something, but yeah.
Some of the ideas you've got with the idea of like expressing kind of like a general database, whether it's deployed with the Helm broker or through RDS or Azure, is really cool. And I noticed there's a lot of similarities to like storage classes where you say specifically, I want a volume. It doesn't really matter where it came from, but with these specs. Do you foresee something like that existing with the service catalog where you could say maybe instead of picking which option, like say, I want to use the Azure MySQL or I want to use the Helm MySQL, just saying I want a MySQL and then exposing that so that it's kind of decided for you by maybe like the admin. Has there been any features or discussion of something like that?
Yeah, I don't remember if I planted you either, so I'll pay you later. But that's a great question as well. We are actually working on that now. And it's going to be, it's open source now. We're going to try to introduce it and upstream it after a little bit to Sync Service Catalog. So exactly what you said. The idea is for an operator of the cluster to kind of preset per namespace or even per app, what does a MySQL mean and what specs are available in the list of plans, as you saw. And then based on the cluster or the namespace or the app, does that mean an in-cluster using the Helm broker? Does that mean on AWS or Azure or whatever, right? So it's that level of abstraction above what we were talking about here.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah, the challenge there is going to be mixing the generic need of I just want a MySQL compatible thing with the specific features that each of the clouds bring. So you want to be able to have some standardization without forcing a lowest common denominator effect as well. So it's just a matter of programming, really.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.